Hello and welcome to this live briefing. We really much appreciate your joining us today. I am Lydia del Valle. I'm Marketing Communications Manager in Savana. In collaboration with the Head and Neck Cancer International Group and Savana, we are going to be talking about the HNC-TACTIC study, an international study of artificial intelligence applied to electronic health records. I'd like to introduce our three speakers today. Our first speaker, Professor Hisham Mehanna. He is the president of the Head and Neck Cancer International Group. As well as with other responsibilities, he is also the chair of the Head and Neck Surgery at the University of Birmingham, and he is also the director of the International Institution of Innovation in the same university. Our second speaker is Miren Taberna. She is a medical oncologist and she's been working clinically in head and neck cancer research for more than 13 years. She's also our Chief Scientific Officer in Savana. Our third speaker is Teresa Díaz. She is a site engagement manager in Savana, and she's also a pharmacist, and she's got a PhD in pharmacy and pharmacology and neuroscience. Now, I would like to tell you that this webinar is divided into 3 sections. Well, actually 4, because the last one is a Q&A section. The first section, Professor Hisham Mehanna is going to put us in context about this study. The second section, Miren Taberna, will talk about the Savana's methodology. And in the third section, Teresa Díaz will talk about Savana's ecosystem. As I said before, the last section is a Q&A section, so please feel free to write in the question chat all questions you may have while you're listening, and we will reply as many as we can in the time available. And now, without any further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Professor Hisham Mehanna.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I hope you can hear me. Yes, I can hear you okay. Can you hear me now? Perfect. So, as always, it was muted. Look, welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you. I won't introduce myself because I've already been introduced, but it's great to be, presenting this new collaboration between the Head and Neck Cancer International Group and Savana. Now, let me see if we can, great. So, as you know, the digitization of health and medicine and the growing availability of electronic healthcare records has allowed and encouraged healthcare professionals and clinical researchers to use cutting-edge methodologies in the realm of artificial intelligence and big data analytics to develop and exploit large medical databases. And in fact, last year, the European Medicines Agency acknowledged that coupled with rapidly developing technology, big data can really complement the evidence from clinical trials and fill in knowledge gaps in medicine. So that's a recognition that there's a role for artificial intelligence and data analytics in developing new treatments for diseases in general and cancer in particular. And importantly, the free text that is jotted down by healthcare professionals in electronic healthcare records reflects the current clinical practice and provides the opportunity for real-time, real-world clinical data. So, and by applying natural language processing, machine learning, that allows us to access and analyze this unstructured data that's in millions of electronic health records that are hitherto have not been used and capitalized. So we wanted to just let you give you an idea of what is the current use of artificial intelligence in head and neck cancer. How groundbreaking is this study that we are talking about today? If you go to PubMed and you look at the literature, you put in head and neck cancer and artificial intelligence or machine learning and prediction or prognosis, what you find is that this red line that you can see is the number of articles on head and neck cancer. And then the blue line at the bottom is those that have artificial intelligence. So head and neck cancer with artificial intelligence in them. And then the ones, we'll come to that in a shortly. So if we focus on this bit, what you can see is the red in head and neck cancer, the green as in artificial intelligence or machine learning in head and neck cancer, and then those with prediction or prognosis out of those with prediction or prognosis as a focus. And this is a logarithmic scale, but what you can see is that publications referring to artificial intelligence or machine learning in head and neck cancer represent roughly 5% of all publications in the field. And actually, that's quite a lot if you think about it. And indeed, that number has really been shooting up since 2018. And if you look at the most frequent words within the titles of the publications, you find that response, prognostic, prediction are the most common words, but also there are things like imaging and radiomics. And if you look at the number of studies that are ongoing in artificial intelligence in head and neck cancer, there are only 3 clinical trials, of which 2 are currently ongoing or actively recruiting patients, and 1 has finished recruitment. In comparison, there are 150 clinical trials on cancer and artificial intelligence in general. So artificial intelligence in head and neck cancer is really a very small subset of that bigger number in cancer, generally speaking. And Mahmoud et al. Published this year a review of all the literature that uses artificial intelligence and machine learning for diagnostic evaluation of head and neck cancer. And this was specifically on automated image analysis. And what they found was that there were 32 studies. And there were these studies, looked at different sites. Oral cavity seemed to be the most common, followed by nasopharynx. In terms of the techniques used, traditional machine learning was employed in 69% of the studies. Deep learning was used in 25% of the study, and both techniques were used in 6% of the study. So this is the background of the state of the literature. And the authors concluded that there was an increasing volume of studies looking at machine learning and artificial intelligence to aid head and neck cancer detection and imaging modalities. These can achieve high degrees of accuracy. But they acknowledged that large-scale, multi-centric prospective studies are required to aid the deployment into clinical practice. And as I said before, this was only on imaging. And to our knowledge, there are no studies currently on free text analysis in head and neck cancer. So essentially, the study that we're talking about today is groundbreaking in that it is the first of those studies, or the first multi-center, multinational study to be run in that field, in head and neck cancer. This is just an example of what can be achieved. The models that they have shown here are able to select which patients should have radiotherapy and which patients should have chemoradiotherapy. And you can see that they actually get better results through their selection. So their selection is good and beneficial. And in terms of the rationale for this study, so we've got some evidence that applying artificial intelligence algorithms to data can result in models that help select for better treatment, as I've just showed you in the previous study. And of course, we're looking in this study at two different groups of patients. There are the patients who undergo curative treatment, so the early and locally advanced patients. And we're looking at the recurrent and metastatic patients. So the locally advanced patients have better prognosis, as you know. They respond better to treatment, but there's still some significant sequelae, and also multimodality treatment. Despite multimodality treatment in the locally advanced disease, a significant proportion, up to 50%, don't respond to treatment. So there is a role for better selection of patients for the treatments that we have already and the treatments that are coming online. In terms of recurrent metastatic disease, well, as you know, immunotherapy has been a game changer and has really led to significant benefit, but only in a proportion of patients. And actually, it's a small proportion of patients. We're talking 20 to 25% of patients. So can we identify which of those patients are the ones that are going to respond so that we can improve their survival and not give the rest of them immunotherapy, which is expensive, etc., and give them some other form of treatment that may be more helpful. So our main aims from this study are to try to use and harness the information that's available from thousands of clinical cases across the world in a multinational setting in a way that has not ever been possible before by going through the electronic health records and capturing that data. We want to be able to customize the prediction of the risk of disease progression at a patient level in order to support clinical decision making, and to build predictive models of dynamic clinical response based on this big data analysis, which, as I mentioned, has not been hitherto available. So why would you want to join this study? Well, I hope that I've inspired you and excited you. This is a groundbreaking study. This is the first time that artificial intelligence, machine learning, is going to be applied to text analysis or data that is taken from the electronic health records, textual data that's taken from electronic health records, in such a large scope and role. So in a way that that involves multi-center, but also multinational. So it's the first study of its kind. For head and neck patients, we may be able to find more targeted treatments, better care pathways, and so lead to improved outcomes. For you, you'll get access to previously unavailable data at a greater scale, as we said, multi-site, multi-language even, and faster implementation of data analysis. So the turnaround is quicker. The things that we get, the insights that we get, will be real time almost, in the sense that it isn't a study that's taken 10 years to do and then we get the results. And then for research institutions, of course, they'll be participating in cutting edge research and innovation and in enhancing their international reputation. But in the end, I think the motivation for all of us is that this may have the potential, could have the potential to really improve patients' outcome. And that's what we all want. So thank you for listening. I'm really excited to be the principal investigator of this study. The Head and Neck Cancer International Group, which is a group of 20 national clinical trials groups who've come together, the aim of the group is to improve patient outcomes in head and neck cancer. And the main action that we wanted to do is to run trials that are multi-center, multinational. And this is exactly the type of trial that we want. But it's amazing that it's also a trial that is groundbreaking in its own right, in the methodology that it's using and the scope and the number of patients that are going to be involved. So we really, I'd encourage you and to participate and to join. And I'll hand over to Miren to talk to you about the study objectives. Thank you, Miren.
Webinar with my colleagues Dr. Mehanna and Teresa Díaz, and let's go straight ahead and see the study objectives. So we want to develop two predictive models based on dynamic risk stratification. The first endpoint will be to assess the risk of recurrence or disease progression following a primary curative treatment in head and neck squamous cell carcinoma patients with early and locally advanced disease. We want to learn which is the risk in different time points of the disease, for example, after diagnosis, after end of treatment, or after a minimum of follow-up. Imagine how is smoking accepting the risk of recurrence at these different points. We also want to identify patients' features that predict long-term survival after immunotherapy treatment in a recurrent and metastatic setting. We know that today we have some tools as the expression of PD-L1, but we need another predictive models just to identify which patients are going to be the responders to these therapies. We also have a lot of secondary objectives that are descriptive ones. We want to describe the median overall survival by primary tumor location in head and neck squamous cell carcinoma patients after stratification for prognostic factors, including tumor stage and treatment. It is important because we are going to base this information in real-world evidence. We want to analyze two subgroups of patients, those in the early and locally advanced disease, and another one in the recurrent and metastatic setting. For the early and locally advanced disease, we want to describe the patterns of follow-up. How many times do they have between visits? How many recurrences are we detecting by, for example, physical examination? We want to compare also the overall survival in patients treated with cisplatin radiotherapy versus radiotherapy cetuximab, and also those patients treated by surgery versus non-surgical treatment in two different groups, HPV positive oropharyngeal cancer patients and also in head and neck squamous cell carcinoma patients, excluding those HPV positive patients. It is important also for us to describe the clinical characteristics of those HPV positive oropharyngeal cancer patients who are the real candidates for de-escalation protocols. If we go through the metastatic and recurrent setting, we want to describe the characteristic of long-term survivors treated with immunotherapy and non-immunotherapy approaches. And we also want to describe the impact of introducing immunotherapy in the recurrent or metastatic setting. And here I am going to explain briefly an outline of the methodology of Savana. As Dr. Mehanna explained before, most of the studies based on artificial intelligence methodology and head and neck cancer are based only in analyzing imaging. Here in Savana, we are focused on extracting the data and analyzing it, and always based on real-world evidence. Savana has developed a natural language processing methodology that it is able to extract the most important information that it is embedded in the electronic health records. And we have also apply a specific big data methodology that it is called natural privacy, and this guarantees the patient's privacy. Teresa is going to talk to you more about this important point later. So how can we conduct our studies? First of all, as every research study that we need to conduct, we need to design the study. And after that, we need to write a protocol. It is really important to understand that to participate with us in this study, we need to have the protocol approval by the ERB of each site that is participating within the study. Once the protocol is approved, we then describe the SAP and also the PAP, that it is the predictive analysis plan for the study. For example, yesterday we have the steering committee meeting where we approved the protocol of the study. So I think in 1 week we will be able to share with you the protocol with all the investigators at sites that are interested in participating with us in this multicenter study. So once we have the protocol and the study design, we need to do a data quality assessment. This point is really important, and data-driven quality assessment, it is needed to guarantee data quality to answer the objectives of the study. For example, if we are going to conduct here a head and neck cancer study, we need to know that the sites that are participating have information in ENT and surgical, maxillofacial surgical department, for example. Also radiation and medical oncology departments. What about the anatomical pathological reports? We also need it. So we need to assess the kind of data that we have from each site. And this is only really important because we can adapt our analysis strategy, for example, to work with missing values and also with data sources heterogeneity, that it is something that happens when we work with different hospitals across the world. Once we know that the data quality is good enough, then we can conduct our natural language processing models. So we have developed a technology that it is called EH-read technology, and it is based on natural language processing and machine learning that extract all the information from the electronic health records. Once we have this information and we get everything is translated using a common terminology that it is called SNOMED. And we came out with a final structured database that is going to be analyzed. It is important to understand that we have a really big team working in training our system. We have a lot of doctors working as annotators, and we have an amazing EH-read team working to make possible the extraction of all the information that it is needed to answer the objective of the study. So, for example, here you can see that when you have an electronic health record like that, we are able to distinguish between different sections of the report. For example, personal background or laboratory analysis. We also can select what kind of terms are we getting off. Are we talking about a lab parameter, which is its value? Are we talking, for example, about a symptom? Or are we talking about a drug and a dosage? So these are things that we need to understand. And it's not only about taking out information about the term, it is only about giving context to this term. So we need to apply different models. For example, is this symptom negated or affirmated? Is this symptom belong to the patient or it is on the family background? So all this information getting from different terms are going to give the context to each patient level. So, as this is a really innovative technique, we have also developed our external evaluation methodology. And I am really happy to share with you this information because it was accepted for publication last week. We have performed an external evaluation for every hospital that is participating with us within the study. What we do, we define the target population. We cannot do it for all the variables included in the study, but we will do it for the main variables. And our medical experts within Savana will define these terms. We also have a system to select the electronic health records that is going to be evaluated in each site. Then we need to design a guideline for this annotation, and we are going to ask two physicians in the hospital that is participating to act as annotators, and also a third to select those annotations that can be misunderstanding between both annotators. So at the end, we are going to create a gold standard corpus from each hospital, and we are going to compare the performance of this gold standard annotation evaluation with the performance that Savana technology has. And we will have a performance metrics by precision, recall, and F1 score. So every hospital that it is going to participate with us will have an external evaluation methodology to really understand that the information that we are extracting is good enough to continue within the study. Once we have done the evaluation and we need to do all the descriptive and predictive analysis, we will use this big structured database, and then all our data scientific team and all the clinical team will perform this methodology to try to answer the primary and secondary objectives of the study. And finally, the results will be shared with all the community to try to improve head and neck cancer patients. So now I am going to give the word to Teresa, that is going to continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon to you all. It's a real pleasure to be in this webinar. My name is Teresa, and as an international medical science liaison, my main function within Savana is to involve hospitals in pioneer multicentric and multilingual deep real-world evidence study that use artificial intelligence and big data. The main purpose of Savana is to apply artificial intelligence in order to perform clinical research. More specifically, we apply natural language processing, machine learning, and deep learning to de-identified and ethically sourced electronic health records in order to facilitate real-world evidence studies. As you can imagine, reutilizing the information or the clinical variables that can be found in the de-identified electronic health records within the free text and the structured text is going to have certain legal implications, such as data protection and data ownerships, which are mainly the topics I would like to talk to you about during my presentation. As you can imagine, these two topics are highly regulated both internationally and nationally. Therefore, Savana will always have to be aligned with these two matters for every single study that we perform internationally. Just to put you a little bit of background, Savana was founded 7 years ago. Although our technology was created in the US, we developed our technology within the Spanish healthcare system, where we now have a research ecosystem of more of 150 hospitals. One of the most important milestones we performed several months ago was to integrate and process the primary care information, the hospital care information of the patients of the community of Madrid, which sum up to 7 million patients. Every year, Savana decides to sponsor an ambitious research project. In this case, for 2021, Savana has decided to sponsor the Head and Neck Cancer Tactic study in collaboration with the Head and Neck International Group. As you have seen in the previous smile, Savana has grown exponentially during the last years. Right now, we are in our expansion phase, and we have onboarded hospitals around the world, which include Europe, North America, England and Ireland, and Latin America, which means that our technology can process the information of medical records in 5 different languages: English, German, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. The reason for such an exponential expansion are these 3 reasons that you can see in these slides. The first one is because we are a medical company. It was founded by doctors and has always been health-oriented. All the study objectives that are included in the protocol will have to be scrutinized and approved by each of the ethical committees of each participating site in the study. Additionally, our business model absolutely excludes sharing or selling any sort of data from the hospital to any third party or the sponsor. The second reason is that data protection and data ownership is assured during all the process of Savana by contract and by design. Although we will talk about this topic in the next slide, it is important to understand that the data ownership is always going to belong to the hospital. Savana, as data processors by contract, will not be able to use any sort of data unless we have the previous permission by contract from the site. Additionally, we have implemented certain levels of layers of security based on a statistical data privacy model, which has been approved by multiple sites across the world, and it's currently under patent. Also, the final report that we'll deliver will always contain anonymized and aggregated data, which means that not only will we not be able to re-identify or track back an individual patient, but also we won't be able to know which hospital the data is coming from, since it is in an aggregated format. Lastly, the universal compatibility. Right now, Savana has read up to 1 billion medical records in different languages, which means, and this is very important to highlight, one of our main competitive advantages, that we can integrate and process information coming from different information systems or electronic healthcare providers. Because once the data arrives de-identified to Savana, we'll transform them into one unique format so we can apply artificial intelligence. Lastly, the resulting database that's going to be analyzed by our statistical and medical team will be a retrospective, anonymized synthetic database, which will be only used for research purposes. And therefore, this is why we don't need the informed consent from the patients. In order to involve a hospital within our research ecosystem, there are two main topics that we need to explain in detail and make sure that the hospital and the principal investigator feels comfortable, which are the data privacy and data ownership. We have implemented different layers of security, which I will talk through during this slide. The first one, as the basis of our work, all the information that will be used for any sort of study we perform has to be de-identified at the site or at the hospital. If the hospital doesn't have experience de-identifying such big amounts of data, Savana can provide our own anonymization tools. What these tools do is they delete all the personal information, such as name, email address, or even the signature of the doctor who has diagnosed the pathology, or other personal information. And we are going to pseudonymize the clinical relevant information so that once it arrives to Savana, we'll be able to integrate different information sources in order to reconstruct the clinical journey of the patient. Most importantly, all the final reports we deliver are going to be in a PDF format, and we will hand in the same version to the sponsor of the study and each of the participating sites. We will only answer to the protocol objectives, and it will be in an aggregated and in an anonymized format, to not be able to re-identify any specific patient or any specific hospital. Additionally, we have an extra layer of security, which is that all our algorithms are going to be developed and trained exclusively with clinical variables, which means that when we apply them to perform any sort of study, they are only going to be able to detect and extract clinical variables. Hence, any database that we build will uniquely contain clinical variables and never personal information by design. We have gone beyond the current state of art and what is required by the regulation, and we have developed our own differential privacy, which we have called natural privacy. This statistical data privacy model leverages the natural errors that occur when applying natural language processing. However, and most importantly, we are going to be able to control that error through the annotation task. This annotation task, as my colleague Miren explained, is a task where the clinicians in each of the sites participating in the study will have to evaluate the performance of Savana and generating the gold standard. This natural privacy, what it does, it permutates at individual level certain clinical variables at a patient level. However, in the aggregated and resulting synthetic database, the information is going to be scientifically accurate, which is going to allow us to extract or extrapolate robust scientific conclusions. Lastly, all these layers I have mentioned during this slide are under the evaluation of the high trust certification. We are currently under the process of obtaining this certification, which is an international health cybersecurity certification, by which Savana certifies that all our internal processes are compliant with GDPR and HIPAA, and which assure a high level of security, continuous improvements and updates in order to be ahead of possible vulnerabilities and threats. But most importantly, it gives the hospitals and the sponsors of the study the confidence that every study we perform are aligned with the current legislation internationally. Now that I have explained the different parties that are involved in a study, which are the hospitals, the sponsor, and Savana, I would like to materialize how all these parties interact in the study. The first step, as I mentioned before, is always going to be to de-identify the data at site. If the hospital doesn't have experience, we are very happy to provide our own. The type of data that we are going to ask for the hospital in order to participate in this sort of studies are going to be hospital or inpatient, outpatient, and emergency discharge reports, as well as clinical notes. The purpose of this is because we are going to merge different information sources to reconstruct the clinical journey of the patients. Since we are going to be analyzing and processing different information sources, such as electronic health records, laboratory, and prescriptions, we are going to be able to analyze the study population from a 360-degree perspective, which is going to allow us to answer the study objective related to the diagnosis evolution, the treatment journey, and the management of the pathology. Once the data is de-identified, it will be transferred to Savana through a secure channel. Then the integration process will happen. We'll unify all those different formats the information might come, and we'll unify it into one single one to apply our artificial intelligence model. Then we'll apply our models, and the resulting database will be analyzed by our internal medical and statistical team in order to deliver the final report in a PDF format, answering exclusively the study objectives and with the anonymized and aggregated data. Additionally, each participating site will obtain licenses of Savana Manager, a clinical tool by which clinicians will be able to access the database from the hospital in order to perform their own real-world evidence studies. The last part of my presentation, I would like to dedicate it informing you how to join the head and neck cancer tactics study. If any clinician is interested or hospital in participating in this study, it is very simple. The only thing they would have to do is enter the landing page and introduce their personal information as well as the hospital they belong to. Once they have submitted that information, we'll contact them as soon as possible. in order to have the first meeting. Once we have had this first meeting, where we'll try and explain a little bit more into depth the methodology we'll use for this specific study and the specific role of the clinician, we'll have the second meeting with the main stakeholders of the hospital, which are normally going to be the R&D department, the legal department, and the technical department. During this meeting, we'll talk about data protection, data ownership, and the de-identification process. It is very important to have these meetings, especially with the hospitals that are not part of our research ecosystem right now, and or that are part of the countries that we're not yet working with. Once we have this meeting, it will give us green light in order to send the contracts for the hospital revision. And once the contracts are signed, we'll start the de-identification process. Once this part has been finished, the data will be transferred to Savana, and we will start the study execution with the data from that specific study in order to deliver the final report. Thank you very much. And now I will give place to my colleague Lydia to start the questions and answers.
Thank you, Hisham, Miren, and Teresa for your wonderful presentations. Now it's time to start the Q&A session. So please write in the chat box all questions you may have, and we will put these questions to our speaker panel. I can see some of them are coming already. So Hisham, could you please start reading the first question?
Yeah, so one of the first questions is the study open to add new objectives? I think we've set the objectives in consultation with a large steering committee who have kind of commented on the objectives and added to them. There is a balance between opening having a lot of study objectives and the amount of data and data points that need to be collected to answer those objectives. And so we're trying to strike a balance between answering certain questions, focusing on the really most important questions, trying to answer them, and being as inclusive as possible. Now, what I would say is this isn't the end point, this is the beginning. So we are collecting data. We're doing the study to answer the objectives of the study. But we are collecting data that can be used as a pilot for further studies. And so, and to answer further objectives. And so, in a way, what we would like to do is for you to come up with these objectives, come to us, come to Savana, talk about those new objectives that you would like to discuss. And then we can apply, or you can apply for funding to be able to answer those questions. So this is only the first of a series of studies. And once we've got the data and analyzed those objectives, there will be the possibility to do other things. But don't let us, but we're keen not to overcomplicate it and not, as Miren says, try to do too much and not do anything, so to speak. So so in a nutshell, currently no, but we're open to other ideas and to opening other studies with appropriate funding, etc. Miren, do you want to add anything to that?
I think this is a great opportunity to start a collaboration, so super happy to have new questions, and we can see how we can manage and conduct another studies. For example, we have an exploratory analysis also on rare head and neck cancer tumors, and we're going to try to describe what is happening with nasopharyngeal cancer, salivary gland cancer, and sinus cancer. So once we have this information, we can apply for further grants. So please go ahead and just give us your ideas, and we can think about the way to collaborate between Savana and the Head and Neck Cancer International Group.
Great, thank you. There's another question: what electronic health records can you gather data from? Would you like to answer that, Miren?
Yeah, of course. We can gather information from all kinds of electronic health records. I mean, we are going to gather information from hospitalization document for outpatient clinics. We are going to have pathological reports that are really important in this study, and we need also information, for example, for a speech and swallow pathology. So we will try to have all the information for all the patients included. It is also important to mention that we are focused on free text, but we can, of course, include all structured data that it is available. So we can include pathological reports, we can include genomic analysis, we can include, for example, lab test results. So we are focused on free text, and this is our main specialty, but of course we are going to include in the study all the structured information that the hospital are going to give us.
Another question is, how many patients do we plan to include, and what are the timelines for when the results should be available? Teresa, would you like to answer that?
Yes, so since we are going to be looking at the information both in the structured and the free text, we are going to be able to analyze all the patients that have this diagnosis or could have had this diagnosis as a personal background. And as well, we are going to be looking at different variables that might or could have been reported by different services. So at the end, the main purpose is to really reconstruct the clinical journey of these patients from multiple points of view and to be able to answer the protocol questions.
So just to say, how many patients, we don't yet have an idea of how many patients. It will be dependent on the number of centers that participate and the number of patients that they have treated. But we are hoping that they're going to run into the thousands through our, the collaborations that are happening. Now, another question says, and in terms of timelines, if I remember correctly, and you'll remind me, but it's from 2014 to 2021 is the data collection, so the patients seen during that time, and the study will run for a period of 2 years. So just so that that's the study period, so to speak. That is correct, isn't it? Or is it 2022, Miren? I can't remember off the top of my head. Is it 2021 or 2022, the end of it?
We said 2021 in order to start the analysis at the beginning of next year. And of course, we need a defined study period of follow-up. That is why we are included so many years within the study period. We will define 2 different setups for the follow-up. For the early and locally advanced patients, we will need more follow-up, at least 3 years, for example, for develop the predictive models. And for the recurrent or metastatic patients, we will need at least 1 year of follow-up to be included in the predictive models.
Great. Now, a good question here. What would be the KPIs to ensure the data quality of hospitals? Teresa, would you like to answer that? I guess the question is, how do we know that the data that we're collecting is good data?
Yes, so I'll answer this question, and maybe Miren can also complement the answer. So there are 2 parts here. So the type of data we ask for the hospital is always going to be at the initial stage, and we're going to ask for the data that is needed to perform the study. So once the data is transferred to Savana, the medical teams are involved in several parts of the process until we deliver the final report. So here's where they're going to assess the amount of data that was generated within the hospital is homogeneous between the sites, and we have the same amount of data by year and reported by the departments. So at the end, we are able to answer the whole of the study objectives. But I would say that the main idea is to have quality checkpoints at the end of each task force performed in Savana in order to deliver the final report.
Do we have? Sorry, Miren, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to add a little more information, that this analysis of the data quality, it is going to give us the possibility also to tailor a strategy, for example, to analyze missing that data, that it is something really important in this kind of studies. Of course, always taking into account the clinical input to make the decision about how we can input missing data. So this is something really important at the beginning of the study period.
Miren, is there a number, a percentage of missing data that we would say, no, this is not sufficient, and we would need to go back and go more data?
We need to determine it depend on the variable that we want to analyze and depend of the objective. So this is something that we need to explain in the statistic analysis plan very carefully, and we need to assess everything with the steering committee. So we will decide, for example, if we are going to look for pain and pain is not in the electronic health record, it's not a missing value. The patient do not have that symptom and it will not be a missing data. But for example, regarding lab test analysis, maybe we can define a strategy and use median from different sites. So this is something that should be specified within the statistic analysis plan. And this is something really important for the kind of study that we are going to develop here.
Great, thank you. In terms of another question, for a site with no prior involvement, what is the expected time frame for the initial learning curve of the de-identification process? I guess this is, somebody looking at it from a clinical point of view, but maybe you can explain a little bit about, it's more about the learning part of the algorithm for each of the sites. Is there a usual time?
Yes, so here there are two different, let's say, processes. The first process would be the relationship between Savana and the hospital, where the different steps that happen in that process are going to be the first meeting with the PI and the first meeting with the main stakeholders within the hospital. Once we finish that meeting, we'll send the contract for revision, and with the signature, it will give us green light to start the de-identification process. So if the hospital hasn't had previous experience de-identifying such big amounts of data, we can provide our own, the ones that we have developed in Savana, and it's estimated to be 1 week of work by the technical team in de-identifying the whole of the data. It is a process that is done once, so from one single, in that week, the technical department will de-identify, in this case, all the study years that will be included and all the information that will be included in the study.
Great, thank you very much. We've got lots of questions coming through. So currently how many languages are interpretable via Savana AI technology? I think they are 5 now, is that right?
Yes, so currently we are able to read medical records in English, Spanish, German, French, and Portuguese. However, we are open to adapting our algorithms to different languages. So if any site is interested, please don't hesitate to contact us.
So in terms of, I've got a question, can the LACOG GBCP, so the Brazilian group of head and neck cancer, help with the study? Can they participate? Because, would it understand Brazilian Portuguese, or and would that be possible? Great. So there you go. We're nodding heads, so that's good. So that's fantastic. And then, do we work with private and public hospitals?
Yes, so we work with both in Spain and internationally. Let's say that the only limitation that Savana has is that the information needs to be written or in the structured text or in the free text, but we don't have any limitation with the type of hospital we collaborate with.
Great. But when you say written, you mean an electronic health record, not a handwritten?
Yes, it has to be reported in the electronic health records. Great,
perfect. And another question, do patients need to sign an informed consent to be part of the study? I think, Teresa, could you answer that again, please?
Yes, so as a general rule, with the countries we are currently working with, it is not needed. And the reason why it is not needed is because the resulting database after applying our natural language processing algorithms is going to be an de-identified retrospective synthetic database, which is only going to be used for research purposes. However, given the situation that a country that is not part of our research ecosystem wants to participate, our legal department would have to evaluate that specific situation to see if it's needed or not.
Great. Let's see there's another question that's just come in. I think we've got maybe time for one last question. Actually, we're closing now, aren't we? So would you like to, we maybe stop at this point and wrap up and maybe do our thank yous. So back over to you, Lydia.
Perfect. So yes, unfortunately, it looks like this webinar is coming to an end. So if there is any outstanding question, please send us an email to info@savanamed.com and we will reply as soon as possible. Moreover, the on-demand video will be available really soon, in the next couple of days or so, and we will send you a link with it. So on my side, just again, thank our panel and thank all of you for joining us today. Have a good evening.